Hello, everybody, to mini proposal workshop. Today, we're gonna check into chapter 8, user experience. When I zoom out, you in the top, you will find like a big red section where you see different chapters 1 to 10. And these are the mini proposal templates, which kind of go over different perspectives how to ideate on proposals. Starting from problem ideation, ending up with proposal cost and delivery. If I zoom into the first session we had, there we came together in Catalyst town hall, and after town hall, and different people brought up like different problems and pre-registered problems. And first idea what we collectively decided to try on was how to keep up with decentralized groups and how to bring up related information from meetings. So once we got into that, we first took up a problem ideation chapter and started figuring out the problem statement, which ended up with disseminating and documenting meetings are time-consuming activities. So after that, we went into ideating on the solution. So how can we make it easier to disseminate and document meetings? And especially around the things what we're doing right now, like when we discuss this, how can we leverage AI to make like summaries, action items, and plan our roadmap and document these discussions we're having here instead of having people doing it, like looking at and analyzing the information. So at the big scope, the solution was a sustainable open source community infrastructure that provides an AI tool to automate meeting documentation and retrieve insights. But for mini proposal workshop, it was quite an extensive thing to go after. So we scope it down to 4 different components. Dashboard, where all of these things are integrated together and give this user experience and flow. And tools on top of that, audio destination, AI pods that understand and leverage the data, which we are collecting on dashboards. And then a bit of understanding how the AI is trained and how do we create it. And then final part is community collaboration. So through different meetings, and community decided we should, or people in the meeting decided we should address community collaboration. So let's zoom out then a bit of, because it's also learning experience having in these mini proposal workshops, and we are doing it all together. The formats of how do we do meetings also started changing. So we, in the outside of this chapter, I started creating these meeting note areas and prepared again problem ideation. So we now looked at the component of collaboration and then started ideating on the problem and solution again. So if you check on the right side, you will see a red bar, which is like red window with the progress bar. So here is a little bit higher overview, what has happened so far. So we kind of started with a big idea, scoped it down into collaboration side, and now we are working on problem statement. Open source platforms that use AI are not being integrated with each other. And what we are here to do is create community standards on how to introduce interoperable AI features. Yeah, in the middle, we had like proposal title section, a taxonomy, stakeholder network, then recently finished defining success and key performance measurements. So if I move right, you will see all of these sessions and what you can look afterwards. And I will put as a little bit to chapter 7, because this would be a good starting point to get the idea of where are the components and like what are we actually then trying to snap off into user experiences. So at the top goal is to have standard documentations of how do we kind of integrate different platforms and different AI tools. So having like this high level understanding, what would be the best use cases, what kind of libraries we should use, what languages, where to go. And this kind of falls into 2 areas. One is a rule book, how reputation is shared between contributors and developers. So making it also a feeling that we all do it together. So if different communities or groups or developers come together, they're able to also leverage this proposal to get their financing and kind of build in aligned way. then which this collaboration gonna create us are bunch of tasks and activities. And we thought that it's to make it collaborative, this should be very related to events and workshops we're gonna have. So if we come together today, we're gonna discuss how to integrate this or that, or like today we're gonna look at this code, and basically these are events where we start aligning. We're gonna end up with videos, and these are all like basically outputs of what I'm sharing about. And then because we chose also a Catalyst Town Hall and Project Catalyst as a funding platform, we included in complete the Talabris Pioneer program and complete the governance framework workshops. So learning work groups around that too, in order to be aligned with the Talabris challenge setting for Fund 10. Anyway, what we know that if we have events and workshops, we're going to have a lot of participants. So how do we engage them is like a very important part. But what make participants into these groups I mentioned before? So through the session, we have had DAL and Swarm, Clarity DAL, Insight Cube, ideations, and now also including in Gimbal Labs, because they are also a developer group and may find connection points where you are building a platform and would like to connect with platforms that use AI or leverage AI. And another alternative thing we need to look at is into licensings, because we want to make it self-sustainable and understand the best licensing we should use. And in the end, our goal is to have a proof of concept, how to integrate open source DAO platforms with another. So at least 2 different platforms and 1 AI model to get work together, and then we can also look into how many use cases we are executing and microservices we are setting up in order to use the platform. So yeah, so that's a current state. And now today we will go into user experience. If you have any questions, any thoughts, this is the point to kind of step forward. Yeah, right now, and from the meeting chat, what's the current thought about how much a mini proposal should be? And in this case, the goal was to get something that we could deliver in like 2 months, but clearly this is not as mini enough. So ideally it was to create a minimum viable product. So if you are going to make in this case, standard documentation, then look at like few documents, what are the most important, how do we create them, and like some aspect to get like a full like execution process to kind of prove that the way we are working, and if we scale it up, it's gonna have an impact, and it has a merit to build something good out of this collaboration method. Perhaps let's jump into the first point then of user experience. So as a reminder, on our problem is open source DAO platforms that use AI are not being integrated with each other. And our goal is to create community standards on how to introduce interoperable AI features. And our first thing is create a flowchart, starting with excitement, the way the person first becomes aware of the experience. What captures their attention? So now put yourself into a user role, and if you now are part of a group of who are creating standards for platforms that leverage AI, what would be your first? What grabs your attention? Would it be like a website or a group of people or a calendar? Like what you think will make you join?
In the other times you've been working on this, and first of all, Tebo, that was an amazing first few minutes. I can't believe how much background you packed in right there. Thank you. In conversations that have been happening so far, how well do people understand the value prop of joining a collective of organizations to, For me, I guess one of the huge benefits is, of course, training the model and having a better one to rely on. What do people understand as the reason to get together and collaborate on this?
Generally, do you mean with mini proposal workshop, or the notion of if we are now joining as groups who are working on standard platforms and standard?
Exactly. The second one, basically, I'm pointing to what you have in blue in the top of the screen here, right? So it looks like a problem statement. Open source DAO platforms using AI are not being integrated. First of all, like, would all such platforms agree that that's a problem, or is that actually what they want? And that's, once you have an answer to that question, what is the reason why people are starting to buy into creating these community standards?
So the first people we had discussed with, I think there are different groups who are we've been discussing with, and I think the ones who understand the most are those who already have a platform and they're looking for users, and having like different platforms that kind of do similar things, but some things are different. And both are open source. Then they're like, oh, let's pull together. Let's combine our wins together. But now it's very complicated thing to do. But what we are here in Cardano has been started quite early, like understanding how do you make it like a tokenomic model of that. Like there are different platforms they want to build and they want to make the best experience for their users, and their developer teams are working on this specific, like we are focusing here on meeting videos and capturing a lot of content from that and creating this like event cycle AI automation, where some people are working on like project management sites or text or like different technical documentations or discussions boards, and they have like very niche elements. And from another side, when we discussed these topics in deep funding after downhole, there was more like, well, we are working on AI marketplace in SingularityNet, and we're looking also users to leverage and understand. And wouldn't it be amazing that you have platforms that has simple like plugin, like, do you want this? Yes, and user can just connect different things together and to just test out, instead of trying to find these different AI tools that could fit to their purpose.
Okay, cool.
And Curtis wanted to also point something.
I was just going to mention how the previous discussion about Game Changer and their role that they're playing in the ecosystem. I do find that same need is showing up here, right? So you have developers and they're creating their communities, but with the current technology that they have available, they have to sort of create that and define it, train their model, build their data sets, the structure of their actual embeddings, but that's proprietary, meaning so somebody else can't go and take that information and use it in their AI. So there's a difference in the schemas and a difference in the way that the models are trained, the embedding, down the road. So how can we sort of leverage some of these frameworks and open source communities to find, well, here's where we align, and let's create, a way where we can share this data, and my AI and your AI can approach it differently, but it's still the same, say, vector database, if that's a chosen component to the framework. So it feels to me like how Game Changer is approaching it, make it easy to use and implement so that every community doesn't have to start from scratch with AI and build on top of each other.
I think also, Curtis, just to kind of add on to that thought, it's not just how different groups are training their AI, but a lot of people are using, from what I can tell, they're using AI to collect data. And and I don't feel like enough attention is paid to where these AI models are actually collecting their data. Like everybody trusts it as if they're actually accessing all the information in the world, and that is absolutely not true, right? It's biased according to the data sets that the AI creators are using. And so like that differentiation between different groups using different AI models, you know, then it starts to get even trickier on that level.
I like that, Steve. Thank you. And in fact, to Tivo's question, because he was asking what's the first thing that comes to mind and what attracts people or excites people. For me, it is that it's having access to your data set. If your community, aggregates metrics or even insight, from C4C, they have all their meetings and everything. If I can actually target that and use that as my own data set to train my model, that's amazing. Now I'm collecting just general insight from all these different communities to aggregate up. So
I put 4 things from discussion. Having easier access to users who would be interested in the AI tools. People develop understanding there are more tools and platforms that align on giving users best experience. The use of data and training in transparent is transparent to participants. And finally, having access and insight to your community group meetings. And when you join on Maraboard, it should give you option to vote on these 4 yellow sticky notes. In order to vote, you would simply click on the sticky note. You can only do it once. And if you mouse over it and press minus, you can remove it. On top left, you can see you have 2 votes. You can only select 2 different sticky notes. And what's going to happen is that when we all finish voting, we maybe see a heat map of the most, or what the topic we should go down to. So our next question would be entry points. So whatever entry point or like excitement we choose, what is the first entry point for this excitement, and or what should it be? Well, looks like this is going to be centralized decision because we did not get that far. Well, if we would do a voting again and remove this one part that didn't get rewards, we may get that 1 point to something else we didn't know. But I will say that all of these excitements are quite great to go down, so we can't really fail when we choose one. And let's take the last one then. So having access to your community or group meetings and insights. And I think we could combine it with the fact of the use of data and training transparent to participants. So we leverage the way the excitement is that the way we are working and showing and storing the data is something that interests people. So what would be the first entry we could take them back to? Do we start requesting more data from them, or we are going to share them some kind of meetings? Where do we store the data? Or is it like a work group, or what are the first thoughts? Maybe not even a workshop, but a video, onboarding videos of where data is stored.
Now, is that important information to those particular communities? Do they need to know where their data is, or do they care more about how to use it or how it adds value to them?
Yes, and what we are doing, we will now think of users' journeys of what they may need. So we kind of assume that they may, if they want to know about, like, they learn about how we work, and they understood that we store data transparently and it's like easy to access, and we train in a way that everybody can kind of see what goes into training data and where the results are coming from. what would be their next step? Do they now want to have access to that data themselves? Do we have to go through them workshops, or we have onboarding videos we share to how to get the data, or we are a bit more protective at that, and we are going to somehow vest them and license them in order to provide them the full data? Like what kind of journey we would want people to let people in, or what do we basically show to them? Because our end goal is to build standards, and now we have people who like the way we record data and use data. What can we do with them? We could share them existing calendar too, because with this, it's quite interesting that after first session they are part of, they can already see how their like participation was turned into data structure that now AI is able to respond to. So if we would say that, okay, you joined in session and session is over, we like play through how much time this person shared or talked in, what kind of key elements this new person who was onboarded. So I guess actually, in every case, we may actually still want to learn about the person who joined in. So it is like interview, like what are you working on? He may already say that what he excites him to join is, and it says like the way we manage data. And we could also ask, what do you get? Like, how would you want to contribute like to the data? And what he says can now be also learned by AI, and then we can prove now what you just said went into this way and it's stored here, and I still think that like some understanding of like the common license or what is this Creative Commons and how does it work, because I think it's very unregulated and underestimated area in the world right now.
That is very valuable, because so I've been building a little bit of this proposal and playing with the AI itself. And when you get into things like auto GPT, so multi-role playing AI, it does fact check and it goes and searches for examples of successful deliverables or a successful meeting around this particular topic. So it's actually looking for a lot of that. So by simply having this meeting, it can then validate the authenticity of what it seems to understand. I'm trying not to get too, I want to stay high level, but there's a bot or a model that actually validates, is this information true? Show me where it was a working or a successful implementation, blah, blah, blah. This provides that data. I feel like this is very good.
Z's got a question in the chat, and we haven't really covered this, how people are thinking about the individual opt-out for a person maybe in an organization that the organization maybe has opted in, but how do you handle,
That is also, I've got a whole document on that. The community I see it as 3 tiers. Opt to be a public community, which means every member understands that all the information here is public information. Nothing's gated. Nothing is protected. So anything that you say or do in that community, right, is public knowledge. Then there's the gated access. You have to, maybe it's an NFT, a token, or just invite only, whatever the case is, you can have gated access to the data. But then, because it goes into the feedback loop system, the training model, if it's not a public community, then it cannot be used to train the model. So there would have to be a second or a third option where they're private, however, they want their data to contribute to training the model, as well as getting access to the data for its community members. So it needs to be abstracted. And then you need to extract the embeddings so that the content itself is not in line of training. Because when you train something with a piece of information, if I said, hey, did Steve do something? It knows that and it can answer that. But if you said person A did something, you're extracting a little bit of the sensitive information. So I think there's options, and we can offer the community at large to decide how do you want your data handled? Because if you're in a meeting and you're building something with, actual coding or whatever, and you're a public entity, all that information is available. So you have no IP in that particular instance.
That's fascinating. All right, so we ended up having, so to say, 5 type of different entry levels, and from these 5 new elements, I'm going to repeat the process and select the same sticky notes, and we give 3 votes this time, 2 minutes, and what you can do is now select which kind of path we want to go down on. So this is our entry, and now assume a role, which kind of user you would like to onboard first. Somebody who was interested in onboarding videos, somebody who wants to join in work groups, somebody who wants to understand how to secure their own data, or somebody who wants the training how the data is used, or understand how to opt out from data being used. And then from that path we select, we then start thinking of engagement, how we engage him on that area. Picture. Well, this time we did get quite a nice tier list of different options. So the biggest interest was to go down the path of training how your data provided data is used. Engagement, the activities that engage the participant in the experience. So what are we going to do when we train people how your provided data is used? What would be the ideal in our case? Do we simply have a workshop where we run person one-to-one, or again, we want to look at the videos, or have like a Canvas module, letting people do some exercises? Or should we have some training, like some test, like, I don't know, basically something similar that Pinbalas did at the start, like these set kits, or like, I don't remember, like playing through a scenario project.
More than thinking about the method of delivering training, I'm kind of thinking back to what we originally voted on off to the left-hand side. Right, so we started from this concept: the use of data and training is transparent and having access, right? Just because information is transparent doesn't necessarily mean that people look at it. And so a success metric, in my opinion, ought to be that it's, is this transparency actually illuminating anything, or is it just creating so much noise that it's still not actually helping anybody? And in the same way, having access versus using access are 2 different things. So this is where I get muddy when I think about AI. It seems to me that some of the outcomes we're talking about, like if you agree with the idea that we should measure success based on people using the access and using the transparency, that might be in direct opposition to actually making a profit, right? The more gated access to this data is, the more individuals will be able to make vast profits from it. Whereas if it's distributed and more people understand it, that power and profit just will be spread more, even though it might also represent a higher degree of value. And so I don't know how to reconcile those things. Like, is there an extent to which it's actually it's getting in the way of some profit motives to make sure that people are actually using these open tools? And if so, is there a degree of activism work that we're actually doing here more than say creating business models? For me, once I answer those questions, then I can think about what the training ought to actually be.
Yeah, so the way I understand you, the engagement here will be not to really look into how you do it, but what are they engaging? So we're making business models for them because it's their data, and we're teaching them how to use their own data. So we need to understand their projects in order to give them business value, or their communities to provide them efficiency value. I don't know how, because it will then depend on their need. Like, okay, so I still feel like we come down a model of training through a scenario, and then the scenarios will be basically, do we want to I think supporting may not be the, well, it will be required, but I think we need to start with educating, so, like, the options, but these participants themselves have to kind of come to the conclusion, or that realization of how to then use the tools in order to do that. Like, they have to set it up on themselves, and we need to be there to show what are the capabilities. Then we don't really get bogged into like every operational, like, unscalable issue. So business need, legal needs, and community requirements. These are 3 different scenarios we may end up with. And one example would be then support understanding the business value of their data. So how about it? If we choose through training through scenario, and we end up, let's say they have a business need, and we provide them support to understand their data through business needs, which can be like all the, I guess in business, it's more like invoice transactionals, and we are basically this kind of stuff, which are like money related, perhaps, maybe not all the time. Then what is the clear exit for that? The end of the signed experience. Would we mean that they now know how to store their data in the dashboard, or they know what kind of access they need? What you guys think about the exit, like the outcome, the clear end of the signed experience? So once they get the support from us, what did they learn?
I think there's a technical answer and a highly philosophical answer here too, right? Like, sure, there are technical elements that people can learn along the way about how to put a business value on the data they're creating here. But in the longer term, part of what we're really talking about is like a misunderstanding or over-reliance on how this data is being used by ML models. It actually slows down our ability to do new things, right? Because if all we're doing is staying stuck in the feedback loop of what exists, we cease to create. how important is that to people? I don't know. It's what scares me about AI when I watch people react to it as if it were magic, when all it is a summary of what we know so far. But how much do people really want to hear that at the beginning of their journey? I don't know.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that point. Hi, everybody. I think I know I just joined later on, but I think it is an important point. I was listening to a podcast with I can't remember his name, a very famous mathematician, and he was talking about the invention of complex numbers, so the square root of negative numbers. And it was, an Italian mathematician, I think, who basically strained his brain to come up with something completely ridiculous to allow him to come to solve a completely different problem, and then came up with this, because the concept's completely ludicrous, and there's no way from the vast field of data that you would have had before, this would have been a logical next step to come to. And a surprising number of our greatest achievements have been these kinds of things, thinking like a child, forgetting all the rules, all the things that came before, Einstein's creativity and so on. So I just want to double up what James said. I think it depends on how much we want to emphasize creativity and discovery and that kind of journey of learning, as opposed to basically reinforcement, which can accelerate us towards results of things that have happened before, but might not be in the same direction as this kind of creative learning journey. Because not knowing how to do something and then being blocked, as far as I understand it, that's the whole philosophy of Gimbal Labs. Because then you're learning by doing, you got stumped, and then you have to rework your brain so that you get around to what that is. And reworking your brain might just be asking a question on a Wednesday, but it might be doing a search and then working all sorts of things out. So anyway, sorry, that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I added that as a bigger sticky note, journey of learning through when we choose training path. So that's something I think we also need to kind of keep in mind all the time when we come together and do stuff together and trying to figure out and make decisions of what to use, what not to use, and how do we use them, where do we use them, with who we use them. It comes with like this emergent feeling of who are participate at the current moment, and always understanding these models and the way we are interacting are usually like generated on spot. So it's based on another person's feedback. This may get into different directions and not as frameworked. Well, from now exit experiences, we went down the path of business needs and looking at support and understanding the business value of their data. So what kind of data to record, and then understanding which access tier to choose, and learn how not to be over reliant on ML models. So kind of doing it at the same time, that don't rely too much, but if you would rely, what data will need, and having that true brain and thought process at the same time. And final thing would be extension, a physical or digital object that the participant can take with them. So after they have learned that, what is that what they have? With an access tier token, I would say they have token now.
I really appreciate that you do this work, Tivo. I really do. Because I think it's going to have huge ramifications in the future. That said, I don't find any of the numbers in the Cardano ecosystem to be statistically large enough to use, right? And they're small enough and large enough to misinterpret what will happen in the future. This is my biggest problem with it, right? Like, even if we go into Catalyst, where that's the largest number of people that I'm aware of, maybe Cornucopias has got a bigger community going on, right? But even those numbers, they pale in significance to the numbers that we're working towards. And I believe if we get locked into these numbers. And I think this is where Z and I are kind of feel similarly from different viewpoints. We're going to skew things for the billion people that we're still waiting on, or that we're still working for. This is what really concerns me. Because I just don't feel like the data sets are large enough to derive long-lasting value or permanent opinions based on them. I don't think it's large enough yet. That's just.
And this is why I kind of like the way we're doing it. And because in the end, it's a lot about like human collaboration and coordination. And if you're able to kind of get the language in a way that each person, each group, and each community in that place can leverage like these tools the same way that they kind of, when they start using it, hopefully in a private environment where the data they produce, they're producing for themselves and kind of learning it from their way in, and when they make connections to different people coming into different innovation funds, maybe in Cardano, maybe in Gimbal Labs, and creating this connection and learning, oh, you are doing this, you have these learning materials. And when our like base knowledge of how to integrate and understand each other's tools, we could have like a more humane access and onboarding way to kind of connect our data so that they also have the access to on their own to decide if they want the learnings, what we have been doing in our groups, into their system, and seeing that difference between what did that group come up and what did that group come up, and what does AI think if these both are combined. And then the more you kind of do it, the more data sets you're going to build to compare it. Although, yeah, that this all comes down to like who is the person who actually wants to compare all of these different things. But I think we have a very huge amount of people and talents and things we can choose from. So I'm sure somebody is interested.
Well, and I will admit, but all that bullshit that I just said, the reality is that, I am successfully marketed to just like millions of other people, right? Like I buy the same stuff that appeals to me, and I think I'm an individual, and yet, that marketing formula works on millions of other people, and they feel the same way I do about these fucking products, so it's a conundrum to feel unique at the same time everybody else reacts the same way.
Well, we did go over user experience. We fully experience of ideating on a model of how would you describe user experiences, what kind of things to think of. And if you want to do it yourself and go crazy and on your own proposals or deriving this, what I would suggest is to go through down all the paths of different things we brainstormed and see where each different sticky note would lead us in like engagement or entry. And that would give us a pretty good overview of what would you need in your proposal to kind of engage your users who you want to get down to. Another thing is also to look back and see the stakeholder networks and see different users from these different stakeholders and how would you onboard them. Because right now we look at the participant side, but what would you look at if you would bring somebody who already is doing workshops and wants to educate? What is the experience for them? Or somebody who is building a system and he has an AI tool and he wants to get connected. So this was a chapter about user experiences. Next one, we will go down to, let me see. On Friday, Africa Town Hall, 18 UTC, we will look at the roles, proposal roles. So those who are interested can join in this one next week. Zoom link is on the sticky board, on the Miro board. You can see on the sticky note, the link will take you to the registration link. Any final words from people?
I just want to say thanks again. Like that was such a cool summary of work so far and really thought provoking. It's really cool to get a snapshot of what's going on right now. There's also a critical parallel. I really like that approach you mentioned right at the end about having people use these tools within their own communities, and then when they're ready, branch out to other ones. And that's the very same approach we're taking in the Plutus PBL course to thinking about credentials, right? We can imagine a future where well-established standards exist, but we're not rushing to assume what those standards should be, trying to create a space for people to play with it locally. And then when communities decide they're ready to start talking to each other and maybe having those standards be interoperable or their community practices be interoperable, I'm excited to see what emerges from there. Yeah, so if you got to run, I get it. We can stop the stream, but thanks for this, man. Really good.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for participating.